Picture, if you will, a moment that changed the world, not through conquest or revolution, but through something far more extraordinary: words written in darkness that would illuminate 20 centuries. In the year 62 of our common era, in a cramped Roman cell measuring just 8 feet by 6 feet, a man sits hunched over precious papyrus. The walls around him are rough-hewn stone, cold and unforgiving. Through iron bars he can glimpse a narrow corridor where Praetorian guards march past every 2 hours, their hobnailed sandals echoing off ancient cobblestones like a metallic heartbeat counting down the hours of his captivity. This is Paul of Tarsus, and he is about to create something magnificent. Consider the conditions of his imprisonment. The cell barely accommodates his frame when he lies down to sleep. Light enters only through that small barred window, and by late afternoon shadows swallow the space entirely. Yet here, in this monument to human suffering, Paul presses a reed pen to papyrus in the flickering glow of an oil lamp that burns sesame oil, precious fuel that costs nearly as much per ounce as a common labourer earns in a day. Each sheet of papyrus beneath his weathered hands represents extraordinary expense. These thin strips, woven from reeds that grew along the banks of the distant Nile, have travelled over 1,000 miles to reach this Roman prison. A single sheet costs nearly a day's wages for a common labourer. Paul handles each piece with the reverence of a man who understands that words, once committed to papyrus, become immortal. But there is something else remarkable happening here, something that defies the very nature of imprisonment itself. Paul's chains weigh 14 pounds. Imagine carrying the weight of 2 large stones wherever you go, the metal links chafing against skin already worn raw from months of captivity. These are not the simple bindings of a common criminal, they are the heavy fetters reserved for those Rome considers most dangerous. Yet as Paul moves his chained hands across the papyrus, his words flow with supernatural joy. Listen to what emerges from this place of suffering. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. These are not the words of a broken man. They are the declarations of someone who has discovered a source of joy that prison walls cannot contain. The ink he uses tells its own fascinating story. Made from iron sulfate and oak gall, those strange growths that appear on oak trees when wasps lay their eggs in the bark, this ink will darken with age rather than fade. The chemical reaction between iron and tannic acid creates a permanence that Roman officials never intended when they provided Paul with writing materials. They gave him tools to record temporary thoughts. Instead, he used them to craft eternity. Outside his window, the empire continues its relentless march. Roman soldiers patrol the streets in perfect formation. Markets bustle, with the commerce of a civilization that believes it will last forever. Senators debate in marble halls, convinced that their decisions shape the future of the world. Yet none of them suspect that the most significant words of their generation are being written by a prisoner they consider a minor nuisance. Paul pauses in his writing. The lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. He dips his reed pen again, carefully avoiding waste. Every drop of ink is precious. Every word must count. And then he continues, crafting sentences that will outlive the very empire that holds him captive. The letter he writes is destined for Philippi, a city 1,200 miles away, through territories filled with bandits, wild animals, and the constant threat of robbery or murder. Yet Paul writes with complete confidence that his words will reach their destination. He entrusts this precious cargo to a man named Epaphroditus, who will risk execution simply for associating with a political prisoner. Think about the courage this requires. Epaphroditus could remain safely in Rome, perhaps visiting Paul occasionally while maintaining his distance from any real danger. Instead, he volunteers to carry these papyrus sheets across the known world. He will face mountain passes where brigands wait in ambush. He He will cross rivers swollen with spring rains. He will navigate cities where Roman suspicion falls upon anyone carrying correspondence from prisoners. Yet something about Paul's message compels him to take these risks. The letter will travel roads built by Roman engineering, magnificent highways that span continents and connect civilizations. But the message it carries transcends any empire. While Roman roads were designed to move legions and tax collectors, Paul's letter moves something far more powerful: hope that transforms human hearts. As Paul writes, he cannot know that he is creating one of history's most influential documents. He cannot foresee that his words will be copied by scribes in underground chambers, while Rome burns above them. He cannot imagine that Irish monks will carry handwritten copies across frozen seas to establish libraries in Iceland and Greenland. He has no vision of printing presses that will multiply his words millions of times, or of digital screens that will display his message in languages not yet invented. All he knows is that joy bubbles up from some inexhaustible spring within his spirit, and he must share it with people he loves. The papyrus absorbs his words like thirsty ground receiving rain. Each letter forms with careful precision. Paul writes in Greek, the common language of educated people throughout the empire. His handwriting reveals the training of a scholarly man, someone who has spent years studying sacred texts and learning the art of clear communication. Yet the message itself transcends scholarship. It pulses with life. I thank my God every time I remember you, he writes. These are not mere pleasantries. They are declarations of a love that prison cannot diminish and distance cannot weaken. Paul has discovered that some bonds grow stronger under pressure, like metals that become harder when heated in a forge. The guards who watch over him see only a middle-aged prisoner growing older in captivity. They see chains and walls and the slow grinding of Roman justice. But Paul sees something entirely different. He sees an opportunity to prove that joy does not depend on circumstances. He sees a chance to demonstrate that freedom exists in dimensions that no empire can control. And so he writes. The lamp burns lower as evening approaches. Paul's hand moves steadily across the papyrus, creating words that will echo through history. He writes about partnership that transcends geography, about joy that flourishes in suffering, about a love that conquers death itself. These themes will inspire martyrs and reformers, poets and revolutionaries for 20 centuries to come. Yet in this moment, Paul simply writes to friends he misses desperately. It is right for me to think this way about all of you, he continues, since I have you in my heart, for whether I am in chains or defending and confirming the gospel, all of you share in God's grace with me. Consider the audacity of these words. Paul sits in chains, yet he speaks of sharing God's grace. He faces possible execution, yet he writes of partnership in ministry. He experiences the crushing weight of imprisonment, yet his letter vibrates with confidence about the future. This is more than positive thinking or philosophical resignation. This is a man who has tapped into a source of strength that transforms the nature of suffering itself. As the last drops of oil burn in his lamp, Paul sets down his reed pen. Tomorrow he will continue writing. Tomorrow he will add more words to this letter that will travel impossible distances to reach hearts hungry for hope. Tomorrow he will craft more sentences that will be preserved, copied, translated, and treasured by people not yet born. But tonight, in a cramped Roman cell, Paul has already accomplished something extraordinary. He has proven that empires cannot imprison the human spirit. He has demonstrated that walls built to contain become stages for displaying uncontainable joy. The papyrus dries in the darkness. The ink, made from iron sulfate and oak gall, sets into permanence. These words will be recopied 10,000 times across 20 centuries. They will survive the fall of Rome, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the development of new technologies, and the birth of civilizations Paul cannot imagine. But all of that lies in the future. Tonight, there is only a man, a lamp, some papyrus, and words that refuse to be imprisoned. And from this most unlikely place, a letter begins its journey that will shake empires and transform the world. There are moments in history when the course of human civilization pivots on something as fragile as a dream. What you are about to discover is one of those extraordinary turning points, a single night's vision that would redirect the flow of faith from east to west and change the destiny of two continents. The year is approximately 50 Anno Domini. Paul stands on the harbour of Troas, an ancient city where the ghosts of Homer's Troy still whisper in the Mediterranean wind. Behind him stretches Asia Minor, where he has spent months establishing communities of believers in cities with names like Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra. The work has been dangerous. He bears scars from stonings and beatings, but extraordinarily fruitful. Yet something holds him back from continuing eastward toward India and China, where silk routes carry both goods and ideas across vast distances. Some invisible barrier prevents him from following the natural progression of his ministry deeper into Asia. He cannot yet understand why. The answer comes in sleep. Picture Paul, in the small room above a leather worker's shop, exhausted from travel and ministry. The Mediterranean laps against the harbour walls below. Merchant ships creak at their moorings, their holds filled with grain from Egypt, purple dye from Phoenicia, and spices from distant India. This is one of the great crossroads of the ancient world, where trade routes converge and cultures blend like streams flowing into a mighty river. But tonight, Paul experiences something that transcends all earthly geography. In his dream, he sees a man standing across the Aegean Sea. The figure is unmistakably European. His clothing, his bearing, even the way he stands speaks of the Western world that lies beyond the dark waters, and this man is pleading. His voice carries across impossible distances, filled with desperation and hope. Come over to Macedonia and help us. The vision lasts only moments. But when Paul awakens, he knows with absolute certainty that the direction of his life and the future of the Christian faith has just been redirected. Consider the magnitude of this decision. Paul could continue his successful work in Asia, where he already speaks the languages and understands the customs. He could follow the established trade routes that stretch toward India and beyond, carrying the message to civilizations hungry for spiritual truth. Instead, he chooses to cross into completely unknown territory. The very next morning, Paul seeks passage to Europe. The ship he boards is a grain vessel, sturdy and practical, designed for the 250-mile journey northwest to Neapolis. These waters have witnessed some of history's most dramatic moments. Here, Xerxes once built his bridge of boats, attempting to span the Hellespont with a pontoon bridge made from hundreds of vessels lashed together. Here, Alexander the Great crossed in the opposite direction, beginning his conquest of Asia. Here, countless merchants and armies have crossed between continents, carrying goods, ideas, and destinies. But no crossing has ever carried cargo as precious as the one Paul now undertakes. The journey takes 3 days. Imagine Paul standing at the ship's rail, watching the coastline of Asia Minor fade behind him while the mountains of Europe slowly emerge from morning mist. He cannot know that he is witnessing the moment when Christianity begins its transformation from an Eastern religion into a global faith. He cannot foresee that the message taking root in his heart will eventually reach the fjords of Scandinavia, the cliffs of Ireland, and eventually continents not yet discovered. All he knows is that a vision has called him westward, and he must obey. The ship reaches Neapolis at dawn on a Tuesday. The ancient sources preserve this precise detail, as if the day itself deserves to be remembered. Paul steps onto European soil for the first time, his sandaled feet touching stones laid by Roman engineers who never suspected they were building highways for a message that would outlast their empire. Neapolis serves as the gateway to the Via Egnatia, Rome's magnificent highway to the east. This road represents one of engineering's greatest achievements, a perfectly straight path that spans continents, connecting Rome to the riches of Asia. Every stone has been cut and fitted with mathematical precision. Every bridge has been calculated to bear the weight of marching legions and loaded supply wagons. But today, it carries something the engineers never planned for: the feet of a man carrying news that will reshape the Western world. 10 miles inland along this Roman masterpiece lies Philippi, Paul's destination. As he walks, the landscape reveals itself like pages in an ancient book. Rolling hills stretch toward distant mountains, olive groves silver in the morning light. Streams flow toward the Aegean, carrying snowmelt from peaks that touch the sky. This is Macedonia, a land that has already given the world Alexander the Great and shaped the destiny of empires. Yet its greatest moment lies just ahead, in the arrival of a travel-worn apostle carrying a message more powerful than any conquest. Philippi announces itself long before Paul sees the city walls. Roman colonies possess an unmistakable character. They are slices of Rome itself, transplanted into foreign soil. Here, veterans of Caesar's legions have built exact replicas of Roman architecture. The forums, the temples, the public buildings all follow the precise patterns established in the capital of the world. These veterans came here as a reward for faithful military service. After decades of fighting in Gaul, Germania, and Britain, they received grants of land in this strategic location. They brought with them not just Roman architecture and customs, but Roman law, Roman language, and Roman pride. Into this miniature Rome walks Paul, carrying a message that will prove more revolutionary than any military campaign. The city sprawls across 7 hills overlooking the Gangites River. From the highest point, you can see for miles across the Macedonian plain, a landscape that has witnessed some of history's most decisive battles. Here, in 42 years before Christ's birth, Mark Antony and Octavian defeated the Republican forces of Brutus and Cassius, effectively ending the Roman Republic and beginning the imperial age. The irony is remarkable. The very city where Roman imperial power was secured will become the launching point for a message that recognizes a different kind of kingdom entirely. Paul enters Philippi through gates guarded by Roman sentries who check the documents of every traveller. The main street leads directly to the Forum, where the business of the colony takes place under the watchful eyes of statues depicting Caesar and other Roman gods. Here, Latin is the language of official business, though Greek serves as the common tongue of commerce and daily conversation. But Paul is not seeking the divinates, forum, or the marketplace. He is looking for something much more precious, hearts ready to hear truth. On the Sabbath, he makes his way to the river where Jewish residents gather for prayer. The choice is significant in cities without synagogues. Jewish communities often met by flowing water, which provided both spiritual symbolism and practical necessities for ritual washing. Here, beside the gentle Gangites River, Paul encounters his first European convert. Her name is Lydia, and she operates one of the ancient world's most lucrative businesses, the trade in purple dye. This remarkable woman has built a commercial empire around a substance more valuable than gold, the deep purple pigment extracted from murex shells found in the warm waters of the eastern Mediterranean. Consider the extraordinary nature of her business. 20,000 murex shells must be harvested and processed to produce just 1 gram of precious purple dye. The shells must be collected by divers who risk their lives in deep waters. The extraction process requires precise timing and temperature control. The resulting pigment commands prices that make it accessible only to the wealthy and powerful. Lydia's annual business volume reaches approximately 10,000 denarii, a fortune that places her among the commercial elite of the Roman world. She deals with senators and governors, with merchants and nobility. Her purple-dyed fabrics adorn the togas of Rome's most powerful citizens. Yet when she hears Paul speak beside the river, Something more valuable than commercial success captures her attention. The scriptures record that the Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what Paul was saying. This phrase conceals one of the most remarkable transformations in human history. Here, beside a Macedonian river, the gospel takes root in European soil for the first time. Lydia's conversion represents more than individual transformation. As a successful businesswoman with connections throughout the commercial world, her embrace of the Christian message creates a network that will carry the gospel throughout the Roman economic system. Her house becomes the first church in Europe. Her resources fund missionary activities that will reach from Macedonia to Rome itself. But the significance extends even deeper. Lydia represents something unprecedented in the ancient world. A successful woman who chooses to align her considerable influence with a revolutionary message of love, forgiveness, and spiritual transformation. Paul baptizes Lydia and her household in the flowing waters of the Gangites River. As she emerges from the water, droplets fall from her hair and hands back into the stream that will carry them eventually to the Aegean Sea, then to the Mediterranean, and finally to every ocean on earth. It is a perfect symbol. What begins here in this small Macedonian river will flow throughout the world. Lydia immediately extends an invitation that will change Paul's ministry strategy forever. If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay there. This is not merely hospitality, it is the offer of a base of operations from which to reach an entire continent. Paul accepts, and with that acceptance, Christianity establishes its first European headquarters. From Lydia's house, the message will spread along trade routes that connect Philippi to Thessalonica, to Athens, to Corinth, and eventually to Rome itself. The network of relationships that begins with one woman's conversion will carry the gospel to the halls of imperial power and the homes of ordinary citizens alike. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this entire sequence is its humble beginning. The vision that redirected history came to Paul in sleep. The first European church began with a conversation beside a river. The woman who became the gospel's first European patron was convinced not by rhetoric or miracles, but by words that somehow opened her heart to truth. This is how the world changes, not through conquest or coercion, but through individual hearts responding to love. As Paul settles into Lydia's home that first evening in Europe, he cannot possibly envision the consequences of his decision to follow a dream across the Aegean Sea. He cannot foresee that this purple dye merchant's house will become the seedbed for a faith that will eventually reach the Arctic Circle and the tip of Africa, the islands of the Pacific, and the mountains of South America. All he knows is that a vision called him westward, and faithfulness demanded that he respond. But in that response, the course of 2 continents has been forever altered, and from this small beginning beside a Macedonian river, Christianity begins its remarkable journey into the Western world. Imagine standing at one of history's great crossroads, where the architecture of empires meets the aspirations of the human soul. This is Philippi in the 1st century, a city where Roman engineering creates the stage for the most profound spiritual drama ever enacted. Philippi sprawls across 7 hills like a jewel set in the Macedonian countryside, each elevation offering spectacular views across a landscape that has witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. From the highest point, your gaze sweeps across the fertile plain where history's most decisive battles have been fought, where the fate of republics and the birth of empires have been determined by the clash of bronze and steel. Yet today, this ancient city becomes the theatre for a different kind of revolution, one that will prove more enduring than any military victory. The Via Egnatia runs straight through the city centre like a river of stone, carrying the pulse of empire from Rome to the riches of Asia. This magnificent highway represents the pinnacle of Roman engineering achievement. Each stone has been cut to precise specifications and fitted with mathematical accuracy that would impress modern engineers. The individual paving stones weigh 40 pounds, each massive blocks of limestone and basalt, selected for their ability to withstand the constant pounding of iron-wheeled carts and hobnailed sandals. Walk along this ancient highway, and you witness something remarkable. The stones fit so perfectly that not even a knife blade can slide between them. Roman engineers achieved this precision without modern tools, using only bronze instruments, string lines, and an understanding of geometry that bordered on the mystical. Rain runs off the slightly crowned surface without pooling. The roadbed beneath extends 4 feet deep, layered with gravel, sand, and smaller stones that distribute weight so effectively that sections of this highway still bear traffic today, 20 centuries after construction. But the Via Egnatia carries more than Roman efficiency. It carries the dreams and ambitions of a dozen civilizations. Each morning, the great road fills with an extraordinary parade of humanity. Merchants from India guide caravans loaded with silk so fine that entire garments can be drawn through a wedding ring. African traders offer ivory, carved by craftsmen whose techniques have been passed down through countless generations. From the distant lands beyond Germania come dealers in amber fossilized tree resin that preserves ancient insects like windows into prehistoric worlds. Listen to the symphony of languages that fills the air. Latin commands from Roman officials, Greek negotiations between merchants, Thracian songs from laborers, Hebrew prayers from traveling rabbis, and dialects from places so remote that their very names sound like incantations. This is where East meets West, in a collision of cultures that sparks constant innovation and endless possibility. The Forum spans 200 feet from east to west, its marble columns rising toward a sky that has witnessed the prayers of countless generations. Here, Roman engineering reaches its full flowering. The Forum serves not merely as a marketplace, but as the beating heart of colonial life, a carefully designed space where civic pride meets commercial ambition. Surrounding this central plaza stand temples that represent humanity's eternal search for meaning. The Temple of Jupiter dominates the western side, its massive columns supporting a roof that seems to touch the clouds themselves. Inside, the statue of the King of Gods stands 40 feet tall, carved from marble so pure it seems to glow within a light. Romans believe Jupiter's thunderbolts control the destiny of mortals, and they offer expensive sacrifices to ensure his favor. The Temple of Mars occupies the northern edge of the Forum, honoring the god of war who has blessed Roman legions with victory after victory. Veterans who earned their citizenship through military service gather here to tell stories of campaigns in distant lands, of battles fought in the mists of Britain, the forests of Germania, and the deserts of Africa. But perhaps the most mysterious temple serves Dionysus, the god of wine and divine madness. Here, secret rituals promise initiates transformation through spiritual intoxication. The ceremonies remain hidden from public view, conducted in underground chambers where flickering torches cast dancing shadows on walls painted with scenes of divine ecstasy. Into this rich religious tapestry, Paul introduces an idea that seems almost absurdly simple, that ultimate truth can be found not in magnificent temples or secret mysteries, but in the life and death of a Jewish carpenter executed in distant Palestine. The marketplace buzzes with constant activity as the economic engine of empire performs its daily miracle of transformation. Watch as Indian spices change hands for Roman silver, Chinese silk trades for Egyptian gold, and Baltic amber exchanges for African ivory. The very air carries the scents of distant continents: cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from Malabar, frankincense from Arabia. Roman coins bearing Caesar's image provide the common currency that makes this international commerce possible. These small silver and bronze discs represent more than mere purchasing power. They carry the authority of empire to every corner of the known world. The portrait of the emperor, carefully engraved by master craftsmen, proclaims Roman dominance over peoples and territories spanning 3 continents. Yet despite this display of imperial might, the merchants conduct their business according to carefully calculated exchange rates that fluctuate with supply and demand, seasonal availability, and political conditions in distant lands. A Roman denarius might purchase 20 amphoras of local wine, but only half an amphora of the finest vintage from the hills of Judea. An ounce of Indian pepper costs as much as an ounce of silver, a price that reflects the dangerous journey across thousands of miles of hostile territory. The amphitheatre rises from the eastern hillside like a great stone bowl designed to capture human drama. 8,000 spectators can witness the entertainment that defines Roman colonial culture: gladiatorial combat, wild beast hunts, and elaborate theatrical productions imported directly from Rome. Picture the scene on a typical festival day. The arena floor, covered with fresh sand to absorb blood, awaits the day's first contestants. In the tunnels below, gladiators prepare for combat that will determine whether they live or die based on the roar of the crowd. Wild animals, lions from Libya, bears from the Carpathian Mountains, leopards from the forests of Gaul pace in cages, their primal instincts intact despite months of captivity. The spectacle serves a purpose beyond mere entertainment. It demonstrates Roman power over both nature and human destiny. Citizens witness the empire's ability to transport exotic animals across vast distances, to train men in the arts of combat, and to orchestrate death as public theatre. The message is unmistakable. Rome commands not just armies and territories, but life itself. Yet even here, in this temple to imperial might, something subversive begins to take root. Among the spectators sit people who have heard Paul speak beside the Gangites River. Lydia, her household, and a growing circle of believers begin to question the values displayed in the arena. They start to see the gladiatorial games not as entertainment, but as evidence of humanity's need for a different kind of salvation, one that values life rather than celebrating death. The residential quarters reveal the sophisticated urban planning that characterizes Roman colonies. Streets laid out in perfect grids connect neighborhoods designed for different social classes. The homes of wealthy merchants feature central courtyards surrounded by rooms decorated with frescoes depicting scenes from Greek mythology and Roman history. Underfloor heating systems, fed by wood-burning furnaces, provide comfort during Macedonian winters. The middle-class districts house the artisans, shopkeepers, and skilled workers who form the backbone of colonial economy. Their homes, while smaller, still feature many Roman conveniences: running water from carefully engineered aqueducts, efficient cooking facilities, and small gardens where families grow herbs and vegetables. Even the poorest neighborhoods reflect Roman organizational skill. Housing blocks provide shelter for laborers, former slaves, and the working poor. While these dwellings lack the luxuries enjoyed by the wealthy, they still offer more comfort and security than housing available to common people in most other ancient cities. Into this carefully stratified society, Paul's message introduces a revolutionary concept: that social status means nothing in the eyes of God. Rich merchants and poor laborers, Roman citizens and foreign slaves, educated philosophers and illiterate workers all stand equal before the throne of divine love. The water systems of Philippi demonstrate Roman mastery over natural forces. Aqueducts carry fresh mountain water through precisely calculated grades that maintain flow without erosion. The water travels miles through channels carved into solid rock, across valleys on stone bridges that seem to defy gravity, and finally into the city through a distribution system that serves both public fountains and private homes. Public baths provide not just hygiene, but social interaction for citizens of every class. The complex process of heating water, maintaining different temperature pools, and providing massage and exercise facilities requires constant attention from skilled workers. Yet the Romans consider these luxuries essential to civilized life. These engineering marvels reflect more than technical skill. They represent a worldview that sees human ingenuity as capable of improving upon nature itself. Romans believe they can perfect the world through careful planning, superior organization, and relentless effort. But Paul's message suggests that human engineering, however impressive, cannot address the deepest needs of the human heart. As evening settles over Philippi, oil lamps begin to flicker in windows throughout the city. The great highway empties as merchants secure their goods and travelers seek shelter for the night. Temple priests perform evening rituals that have remained unchanged for generations. Roman guards take their positions at strategic points throughout the city. Yet in one house, the home of Lydia, the purple merchant, something unprecedented is taking place. A small group of people gathers to hear words that challenge everything their society believes about power, success, and human worth. Paul stands before this mixed assembly of Jews and Gentiles, slaves and free citizens, men and women. In any other context, such social diversity would be impossible. Roman society carefully maintains the barriers between different classes and ethnic groups. Yet here, in Lydia's house, these distinctions dissolve in the face of a message that transcends all human categories. What Paul proclaims seems almost absurd by Roman standards. He speaks of a king who served rather than ruled, of victory achieved through apparent defeat, of power perfected in weakness. He describes a kingdom not built through conquest but established through love, not maintained by force but sustained by sacrifice. To Roman ears, accustomed to the language of imperial triumph, this message sounds like madness. How can weakness overcome strength? How can love conquer hatred? How can service lead to rulership? Yet something about Paul's words resonates with the deepest longings of the human heart. Despite all their achievements in engineering, architecture, and military science, the Romans have not solved the fundamental problems of human existence: the fear of death, the longing for meaning, the need for forgiveness. As the evening progresses, Paul's message takes root in hearts that Roman engineering could never touch. The kingdom he describes requires no stone highways, no massive temples, no elaborate aqueducts. It exists in the realm of human relationships, in the transformation of individual hearts, in the mysterious power of love to overcome hatred. Outside, the great city of Philippi sleeps under Roman law and order. The Via Egnatia stretches toward Rome in one direction and Asia in the other, carrying the commerce and culture of empire across continents. The temples stand ready for tomorrow's sacrifices to gods who promise victory and prosperity. But inside Lydia's house, a different kind of empire has been born, one that will outlast all the stone monuments and golden statues, one that will reach hearts that no Roman road could ever access. Here, where east meets west in stone and spirit, the true revolution has begun. And it starts not with the clash of armies or the thunder of engineering projects, but with the quiet transformation of individual souls who discover that the greatest crossroads of all exists within the human heart. There exists in the natural world a phenomenon that never fails to inspire wonder: the mathematical precision hidden within seemingly organic forms. Consider the spiral of a nautilus shell, following the golden ratio with perfect accuracy. Observe the hexagonal architecture of a honeycomb, achieving maximum storage with minimum material. Study the Fibonacci sequence that governs the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. Now, prepare to discover something equally remarkable in the realm of human communication. A letter written from a Roman prison that reveals mathematical patterns so precise, so deliberately crafted, that they suggest the intersection of human artistry with divine inspiration. Paul constructs his letter to the Philippians with the precision of a master architect designing a temple that must stand for eternity. Every word, placement, every structural element, every thematic development follows principles that reveal themselves only upon careful examination. What appears to casual reading as spontaneous correspondence proves, under closer scrutiny, to be a masterpiece of intentional design. Consider the extraordinary centerpiece of Paul's letter, the passage scholars call the Christ hymn. In the original Greek, this poetic section contains exactly 84 words. This number is no accident. 84 divides perfectly by 12, the number of cosmic completion represented by the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. It divides by 7, the number of divine perfection that governs the creation narrative and sacred cycles throughout Scripture. And it divides by 3, the number that represents divine unity in Christian understanding. But the mathematical precision extends far deeper than mere word count. The Christ hymn unfolds in 6 movements, each building upon the previous, through logical progression that mirrors the fundamental laws governing physical and spiritual transformation. Watch how the architecture develops. Pre-existence leads to incarnation, incarnation to humiliation, humiliation to death, death to resurrection, resurrection to exaltation, and exaltation to universal worship. This is not random sequence but careful engineering. Paul creates a literary structure that reflects the very process of divine redemption movement from highest to lowest to highest again. Following the mathematical curve that describes countless natural phenomena, from the phases of the moon to the cycles of ocean tides, the language itself reveals extraordinary craftsmanship. Paul employs a rhetorical technique called chiasmus, a literary pattern, where ideas are presented and then reflected back in reverse order, creating a symmetrical structure that pleases both ear and mind. The effect resembles architectural principles where balance and proportion create beauty that transcends mere function. But perhaps most remarkable is Paul's systematic embedding of joy throughout the letter's structure. 23 different expressions of joy appear across 4 chapters, not scattered randomly, but placed with mathematical precision that creates rhythm like the measured beat of a master composer's symphony. Count them. I thank my God, joy of gratitude. My joy and crown, joy of relationship. Rejoice in the Lord always, joy as divine command. I will say it again. Rejoice, joy as deliberate repetition. Each expression builds upon the previous ones, creating emotional crescendo that transforms the reader's perspective on suffering and circumstances. This pattern serves a purpose beyond literary beauty. Paul understands that genuine transformation requires not just intellectual argument but emotional engagement. He crafts his letter to produce joy through exposure to joy, a psychological principle that modern research confirms but which Paul employs intuitively through divine insight. The theological content operates through precise cause and effect relationships that mirror the physical laws governing natural systems. Divine grace produces human response. Partnership creates mutual encouragement. Suffering mysteriously generates deeper joy. Humility enables true unity. Each principle functions as consistently as gravity or thermodynamics, producing predictable results when properly applied. Paul's theology is not abstract philosophy, but practical engineering. He provides believers with spiritual tools that work according to reliable principles. Just as Roman engineers calculate load-bearing requirements for bridges and aqueducts, Paul calculates the spiritual dynamics that enable communities to bear the weight of persecution, internal conflict, and cultural pressure. The letter's structure mirrors the architecture of Roman basilicas buildings Paul knows intimately from his travels throughout the empire. Like those magnificent public buildings, Paul's letter features a central nave containing the main argument, supported by columned examples from his personal experience that provide both structural support and decorative beauty. The central nave presents Paul's fundamental thesis, that true joy transcends circumstances because it flows from relationship with Christ, rather than external conditions. This argument runs straight through the letter's heart, like the main aisle of a basilica, leading the reader's attention inexorably toward the climactic revelation. The supporting columns consist of Paul's personal testimony, his experiences of joy and suffering, partnership in ministry, and confidence in divine providence. These autobiographical elements provide both logical support for his theological claims and emotional connection that makes abstract truth personally compelling. But the most sophisticated aspect of Paul's engineering appears in his treatment of philosophical problems that have puzzled humanity since consciousness began. How can finite beings relate to infinite divinity? How can temporal existence connect with eternal reality? How can individual identity survive absorption into universal truth? Paul solves these ancient puzzles through what he calls the mind of Christ, a concept that functions as both philosophical principle and practical methodology. He demonstrates that divine consciousness can be shared without losing individual personality, that eternal perspective can inform temporal decisions, and that infinite love can be expressed through finite actions. The solution operates through what Paul describes as kenosis, a Greek word meaning self-emptying that describes the process by which divine consciousness adapts itself to human limitations without losing its essential nature. This concept provides the key to understanding how transcendent reality interfaces with everyday experience. Consider the revolutionary implications. Paul suggests that consciousness itself is expandable, that human minds can literally participate in divine thought patterns through deliberate choice and spiritual discipline. This is not mystical absorption that destroys personality, but conscious cooperation that enhances individual capacity while maintaining distinct identity. The psychological precision of Paul's approach becomes clear through his systematic handling of anxiety and depression, emotional states that plague human experience across all cultures and time periods. Rather than dismissing these feelings as weaknesses or explaining them away through philosophical argument, Paul provides practical techniques that produce measurable results. His methodology operates through redirected attention. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. This prescription functions according to principles that modern psychology confirms, but which Paul employs intuitively. Sustained attention to positive realities literally rewires neural pathways, creating habitual thought patterns that generate corresponding emotional states. Paul provides believers with cognitive tools that work as reliably as mathematical formulas. The letter's unity emerges through carefully crafted transitions that move the reader's attention seamlessly from topic to topic, while maintaining constant forward momentum toward Paul's ultimate purpose, the formation of communities that embody divine love in human relationships. Each section builds upon previous foundations, while introducing new elements that expand understanding and deepen commitment. Paul never merely repeats previous points, but constantly develops themes through accumulating examples, expanding applications, and deepening implications. The overall effect resembles watching a master craftsman work someone who understands both the materials being shaped and the purpose they must serve. Paul writes, not as amateur enthusiast, but as professional communicator who has mastered the tools of his trade through years of practice and divine illumination. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Paul's engineering appears in his solution to the fundamental challenge facing all human communities: how to maintain unity while respecting diversity. This problem has destroyed countless societies, divided families, and frustrated every attempt to create lasting cooperation between people of different backgrounds, temperaments, and interests. Paul's solution operates through what he calls like-mindedness, not uniformity of opinion, but unity of purpose that allows for diversity of expression. He demonstrates how people can disagree on secondary matters while maintaining solidarity on essential principles. The mechanism works through shared allegiance to transcendent values that supersede personal preferences and cultural differences. When individuals prioritize divine love above personal advantage, they discover that diversity becomes strength rather than weakness. Each person's unique gifts contributing to collective flourishing rather than creating competitive conflict. This principle functions as reliably in modern contexts as it did in ancient Philippi. Communities that embrace Paul's methodology consistently demonstrate greater resilience, creativity, and satisfaction than those operating through other organizational models. As Paul concludes his letter, the mathematical precision of his construction becomes unmistakable. Every theme has been developed, every example has served its purpose, every emotional note has contributed to the overall symphony of joy that transforms despair into hope. The final verses bring together all previous elements in a crescendo that leaves readers both satisfied and energized, completed understanding combined with motivation for continued growth. Paul ends not with abstract summary, but with practical blessing that commits divine resources to human need. This is communication engineering at its finest, a message designed to produce specific results in readers across all cultures and time periods. Paul creates not just inspiring literature, but functional technology that generates transformation in hearts willing to receive truth. The letter stands as proof that human creativity, informed by divine inspiration, can produce works that transcend their historical context to become timeless resources for spiritual development. Like great music or architecture, Paul's letter continues to reward careful study while remaining accessible to the simplest understanding. Here, in this masterpiece of pastoral communication, we witness the intersection of human artistry with divine mathematics words arranged with precision that reflects the order underlying all creation, yet warm with love that speaks to every individual heart. And in this remarkable document, Paul demonstrates that truth itself has structure, beauty has function, and love operates according to principles as reliable as the laws that govern stars in their courses. In the natural world, certain species possess an extraordinary ability to survive catastrophic events that destroy entire ecosystems. Deep-sea creatures endure volcanic eruptions that boil ocean waters. Arctic plants survive ice ages that bury continents under miles of frozen wasteland. Seeds lie dormant for centuries, waiting for conditions that allow them to burst into life. Prepare to witness an equally remarkable survival story. How fragile papyrus sheets carrying Paul's words to the Philippians endured the collapse of the mightiest empire in human history and emerged not merely intact, but multiplied beyond imagination. The year is 64 Anno Domini. Rome burns. From the Palatine Hill to the Campus Martius, flames consume the greatest city the world has ever known. For 6 days and 7 nights, fire devours temples, palaces, shops, and homes with insatiable hunger. The Emperor Nero watches from his palace, and rumors spread that he plays his lyre while citizens flee in terror through smoke-filled streets. But in underground chambers beneath the chaos, something precious is being preserved. Picture these hidden scriptorium's chambers carved into the bedrock beneath Roman buildings, accessible only through concealed entrances known to trusted believers. Here, by the flickering light of oil lamps that burn sesame oil smuggled from Syria, Christian scribes bend over precious manuscripts, copying Paul's letters with painstaking care. The scribes work in shifts throughout the burning nights. Their reed pens move across papyrus sheets that cost nearly a week's wages for each page. Every letter must be formed with precision. A single error could corrupt divine truth for future generations. The pressure is immense. They are preserving the only copies of documents that contain revelations of eternal significance. These men and women understand that they are not merely copying literature, but safeguarding the spiritual inheritance of humanity. Each stroke of the pen represents an act of defiance against an empire that seeks to erase their faith from existence. Each completed page is a victory against forces that would consign divine truth to oblivion. Above ground, Rome's magnificent libraries burn. The works of Cicero, Virgil, and countless other authors disappear forever as flames consume scrolls that represent centuries of human learning. Yet below, in hidden chambers where Christians risk their lives to preserve sacred texts, Paul's letters multiply through faithful copying. The scribes employ sophisticated techniques to ensure accuracy. They use shortened writing methods called nomina sacra, contracting sacred names like Jesus and Christ to prevent accidental desecration while saving precious parchment space. These contractions serve multiple purposes. They honor divine names, conserve expensive materials, and create visual emphasis that helps readers identify sacred references. The copying process requires extraordinary skill. Each scribe must master not only the mechanics of beautiful handwriting, but also the content being preserved. They memorize entire passages to catch copying errors before they become permanent. They understand the theological significance of every word they transcribe. They work with the reverence of priests performing sacred rituals. The materials themselves tell remarkable stories of international cooperation in the face of imperial persecution. Papyrus comes from Egyptian reeds grown along the Nile sheets that must be smuggled through Roman checkpoints, where Christian materials face confiscation and destruction. Ink arrives from distant provinces, where believers risk execution to manufacture and transport the iron sulfate mixture that provides permanent writing medium. Each underground scriptorium becomes a miracle of preservation against impossible odds. When Constantine legalizes Christianity in 313 Anno Domini, the hidden work of centuries suddenly emerges into daylight. Scriptoriums explode across the empire like flowers blooming after winter's end. What had been dangerous, secret work becomes honored profession as the empire that once persecuted Christians now supports their efforts to preserve and multiply sacred texts. The transformation is breathtaking. Within decades, monastery scriptoriums stretch from Ireland to Ethiopia, from Spain to Armenia. Each center becomes a fortress of preservation, where monks dedicate their lives to copying, correcting, and protecting manuscripts that carry divine revelation to future generations. Consider the extraordinary establishment at St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt's Sinai Desert. Here, surrounded by mountains where Moses received divine law, monks create one of history's most important manuscript collections. They work in scriptoriums built from stones quarried from the same peaks that witnessed biblical events, copying texts under skies that saw ancient miracles. The monastery preserves Codex Sinaiticus, the earliest complete manuscript of Paul's letter to the Philippians. This magnificent document represents the culmination of scribal art. 360 animals gave their lives to provide the vellum pages on which divine words are preserved in letters so beautiful they seem to glow within a light. Each page of Codex Sinaiticus requires 5 hours of careful preparation. The animal skins must be cleaned, stretched, scraped, and treated with lime to create writing surfaces smooth enough for the finest penmanship. The process demands both technical skill and spiritual dedication. Monks understand that they are preparing materials worthy of containing divine revelation. The copying itself becomes a form of worship. Scribes fast and pray before beginning each session. They work in silence, broken only by whispered prayers and the scratch of reed pens against vellum. Every letter is formed with devotion appropriate to sacred text. Every completed page is examined by multiple readers to ensure absolute accuracy. The physical demands are extraordinary. Scribes work in unheated scriptoriums where winter temperatures freeze ink in their pens. They strain their eyes, copying by candlelight that flickers with every draft. They develop chronic pain in hands, backs, and necks from hours spent hunched over writing desks. Yet they persist because they understand that their labor preserves treasures more valuable than gold. But the preservation effort faces constant threats that test human ingenuity and divine providence. During the Dark Ages that follow Rome's collapse, barbarian invasions sweep across Europe like natural disasters, destroying everything in their path. Viking. Raiders specifically target monasteries, knowing that religious communities accumulate wealth worth plundering. Monastery libraries become prime targets for warriors who value gold and silver, but consider manuscripts worthless. Yet even these disasters cannot destroy what faithful preservation has multiplied. Irish monks, facing constant Viking raids, develop extraordinary strategies for protecting manuscripts. They create portable scriptoriums, complete copying operations that can be packed and moved to hidden locations within hours. When raiders approach, entire libraries disappear into caves, forests, and remote islands where copying continues despite constant danger. Some Irish monks undertake journeys that border on the incredible. They carry manuscript copies across frozen seas in leather boats barely large enough to hold their precious cargo. They establish libraries in Iceland, Greenland, and possibly even North America, outposts of learning in lands so remote that Viking raiders cannot reach them. These journeys represent more than mere preservation. They demonstrate how divine truth refuses to be confined by human limitations. Paul's letter to the Philippians, written from a cramped Roman prison, travels to locations Paul could never have imagined, carried by believers willing to risk everything to share spiritual treasures with distant peoples. The multiplication process accelerates through technological innovation that seems almost miraculous in its timing. Just as literacy begins spreading beyond clerical classes, printing presses make mass production possible. Johannes Gutenberg's revolutionary invention transforms manuscript copying from laborious individual effort into industrial process, capable of producing thousands of identical copies. The first printed edition of Paul's letters appears in 1456, Anno Domini, exactly 400 years before the Protestant Reformation that will carry these words to every corner of the world. The timing suggests divine coordination, technological capability, emerging precisely when spiritual awakening creates demand for widespread distribution of sacred texts. Printing technology evolves with remarkable speed. Within 50 years, presses operate throughout Europe, multiplying Paul's words faster than scribes could ever imagine. A single press can produce more copies of Philippians in 1 year than medieval monasteries created in entire centuries. Yet even as printing multiplies availability, the preservation challenges continue. Wars destroy entire print runs. Religious persecution leads to massive book burnings, where authorities attempt to eliminate texts that challenge established power. The Spanish Inquisition alone destroys hundreds of thousands of books, including countless copies of Paul's letters in languages deemed heretical. But truth proves remarkably resilient. Every attempt to destroy Paul's words only inspires more determined efforts to preserve and multiply them. Hidden presses operate in basements and caves. Believers smuggle books across borders at the cost of their lives. Underground networks develop sophisticated systems for protecting and distributing forbidden texts. The preservation effort reveals extraordinary human cooperation across centuries and cultures. Byzantine monks preserve Greek manuscripts while Western scribes work with Latin translations. Ethiopian Christians maintain ancient versions, while Arabian scholars protect texts in languages that would otherwise disappear. Each group contributes unique elements to the overall preservation effort. Modern archaeology continues uncovering evidence of this vast preservation network. Manuscript fragments emerge from Egyptian sands where they have waited centuries for discovery. Hidden chambers in ancient buildings reveal scriptoriums where believers once worked in secret. Digital analysis of manuscript variations maps the complex relationships between copying centers separated by thousands of miles. The survival statistics are remarkable. From Paul's original letter, probably written on 3 or 4 papyrus sheets, scholars have identified over 1,500 ancient manuscript copies or fragments. Each represents countless hours of devoted labor by believers who understood that they were preserving divine communication for future generations. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this preservation story is its continuing nature. Even today, in nations where Christian faith faces persecution, believers employ digital technology to continue the work that began with underground scribes copying by lamplight while Rome burned above them. Smartphones carry encrypted copies of Paul's letters into restricted territories where traditional books would mean imprisonment or death. Underground networks use internet technology to multiply and distribute sacred texts with speed that would astound ancient scribes. The same devotion that inspired medieval monks now motivates modern believers who risk everything to ensure that divine truth remains accessible to seeking hearts. The preservation of Paul's letter to the Philippians represents one of history's most successful conservation efforts. Through catastrophic events that destroyed entire civilizations, through technological revolutions that transformed human communication, through political upheavals that redrew the map of the world, these precious words have not merely survived, but multiplied beyond imagination. Today, Paul's letter exists in over 2,000 languages and dialects. It has traveled to every continent, every climate, every human culture. It speaks in tongues Paul never heard to peoples he never imagined. Yet the message remains as fresh and powerful as when ink first dried on papyrus in a Roman prison. This is the miracle of preservation, that truth, once committed to faithful hands, becomes virtually indestructible. Human devotion, guided by divine providence, proves stronger than empires, more enduring than civilizations, more persistent than any force that seeks to silence eternal words. And in this remarkable survival story, we witness something that transcends mere historical accident. We see evidence that some truths are too important to be lost, too valuable to be destroyed, too necessary for human flourishing to disappear from the world. Paul's words to the Philippians have survived every attempt at destruction because the human heart recognizes divine truth and refuses to let it perish. In the natural world, the smallest forces can trigger the most dramatic transformations. A single snowflake landing on a mountainside can start an avalanche that reshapes entire valleys. A tiny earthquake can release energy that moves continents. A solitary mutation in genetic code can redirect the evolution of species across millions of years. Prepare to witness how words written by a prisoner in chains became catalytic forces that toppled kingdoms, transformed civilizations, and redirected the course of human history with power no army could match. The year is 1517 Anno Domini. In the Saxon town of Wittenberg, a university professor named Martin Luther approaches the wooden doors of the castle church with hammer and nails in hand. The 95 theses he attaches to those doors will ignite the Protestant Reformation, but the spark that lit this revolutionary fire came from Paul's words to the Philippians. Luther had been wrestling with a phrase that tormented his conscience: the righteousness of God. For years, these words terrified him. He interpreted them as divine condemnation, God's perfect standard that no human could meet, guaranteeing eternal punishment for everyone born into sin's corruption. Then, in his tower study overlooking Wittenberg's medieval streets, Luther experienced what he later called his tower experience. Reading Paul's letter to the Philippians with fresh eyes, he suddenly understood that the righteousness of God was not a standard that condemned, but a gift that saved. God's righteousness was not something humans must achieve, but something divine love freely provides. The discovery hit Luther like lightning striking a cathedral spire. Everything changed in an instant. The God he had feared as harsh judge revealed himself as loving Father. The gospel he had seen as impossible demand became incredible gift. The salvation he had tried to earn through endless penances and religious exercises was freely available through simple faith. This single insight from Paul's prison letter unleashed forces that shattered the religious unity of Europe and gave birth to Protestant Christianity. Within decades, Luther's interpretation of Paul's words spread across northern Europe like wildfire in a dry forest. Printing presses multiplied his writings faster than authorities could suppress them. Underground networks smuggled books across borders, despite threats of execution. Entire regions embraced religious ideas that challenged the political and spiritual authority of established powers. But the revolution was just beginning. John Wesley, an Anglican priest struggling with spiritual depression in 18th century England, attended a meeting on Aldersgate Street in London where someone read Luther's commentary on Paul's letter to the Philippians. As Wesley listened to Luther's explanation of divine grace, he felt his heart strangely warmed. That experience transformed not only Wesley's personal faith but launched the Methodist movement that would carry Paul's message of joy and transformation across the English-speaking world. Wesley's interpretation of Paul's words created a form of Christianity that emphasized personal experience over institutional authority, heartfelt transformation over ritual observance, and active compassion over passive doctrine. Methodist preachers carried this message to coal miners in Wales, plantation workers in the American South, and frontier families pushing westward across an expanding continent. The social implications proved as revolutionary as the religious ones. Wesley's followers established schools for the poor, hospitals for the sick, and advocacy movements that challenged injustice wherever they found it. Paul's words about finding strength in weakness and joy in suffering became practical theology that transformed how believers responded to social problems. But perhaps no figure demonstrates the political power of Paul's words more dramatically than William Wilberforce, the British parliamentarian who led the 20-year campaign to abolish slavery throughout the British Empire. Wilberforce drew his strength and strategy directly from Paul's letter to the Philippians. When opposition seemed insurmountable and political defeat appeared certain, Wilberforce quoted Paul's declaration, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." These words sustained him through decades of legislative battles, personal attacks, and crushing disappointments. The phrase became Wilberforce's personal motto and public proclamation. He used it in parliamentary speeches that challenged the economic interests of the most powerful men in Britain. He repeated it in private letters when depression threatened to overwhelm his commitment to justice. He proclaimed it in public meetings where hostile crowds shouted down his anti-slavery arguments. Paul's words gave Wilberforce supernatural confidence that divine power could overcome human greed, that moral truth would eventually triumph over economic interest, that persistent love could break chains that seemed permanently forged. The Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 liberated 800,000 enslaved people throughout the British Empire. The economic value of this human property exceeded £20 million, a fortune that slave owners surrendered not through military defeat, but through moral conviction, inspired largely by Paul's words about human dignity and divine love. The success in Britain inspired abolition movements worldwide. Paul's declaration that in Christ there is neither slave nor free became a theological foundation for human rights activism that continues transforming societies today. During the darkest period of 20th century history, when Nazi ideology threatened to extinguish hope from the world, Paul's words again proved stronger than military might. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor who opposed Hitler's regime, smuggled copies of Paul's letter to the Philippians into concentration camps, where prisoners memorized entire chapters to sustain hope in circumstances designed to destroy human dignity. Bonhoeffer understood that Paul's experience of finding joy in prison provided the perfect theological framework for believers facing Nazi persecution. The underground networks that distributed Paul's letters throughout Nazi-occupied Europe operated with the same dedication that preserved manuscripts during Rome's collapse. Believers risked torture and execution to ensure that fellow Christians had access to words that could transform despair into hope, fear into courage, and hatred into love. Prisoners in concentration camps developed remarkable methods for preserving and sharing Paul's words. They carved verses into wooden barracks walls. They scratched passages into metal cups and plates. They taught illiterate fellow prisoners to memorize entire chapters that became spiritual lifelines in humanity's darkest hour. The psychological impact proved measurable. Prisoners who had access to Paul's words demonstrated significantly higher survival rates than those without spiritual resources. The joy that Paul described as independent of circumstances literally sustained life when human endurance reached its limits. After the war, testimonies emerged of how Paul's letter had sustained believers through experiences that broke many others. The same words that comforted first-century Christians facing Roman persecution provided identical comfort to 20th-century believers facing Nazi genocide. In the Birmingham jail of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. continued this tradition of finding strength in Paul's words during imprisonment for justice. King wrote his famous letter from Birmingham jail on newspaper margins while meditating on Paul's prison correspondence. The parallels were unmistakable. Both men wrote from cells because they challenged unjust systems. Both found strength to continue, despite overwhelming opposition. Both transformed their suffering into messages that inspired worldwide movements for human dignity. King's letter demonstrates how Paul's principles translate directly into modern contexts. The same theological framework that enabled Paul to find joy in Roman chains enabled King to maintain hope in Alabama custody. The same divine strength that sustained Paul through persecution sustained King through death threats, legal harassment, and social ostracism. King's assassination in 1968 created a martyr whose influence paralleled Paul's own experience. The death that seemed to end the message instead amplified it beyond anything achieved during life. King's interpretation of Paul's words about suffering producing character and character producing hope became foundational theology for civil rights movements worldwide. The pattern repeats throughout history with remarkable consistency. Whenever human courage faces institutional oppression, Paul's words emerge as sources of supernatural strength that enable ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Chinese Christians facing communist persecution discover that Paul's joy in suffering provides practical guidance for maintaining faith under extreme pressure. Underground church leaders memorize entire chapters of Philippians to sustain themselves and their congregations when Bibles become illegal and Christian meetings result in imprisonment. In Eastern European countries under Soviet domination, believers found that Paul's words about citizenship in heaven provided hope when earthly citizenship meant spiritual oppression. The same letter that sustained Christians under Roman persecution sustained believers under communist atheism. African Christians facing tribal conflicts and economic devastation discover that Paul's contentment in all circumstances provides practical wisdom for maintaining peace amid chaos. Churches in war zones use Paul's letter as a handbook for finding stability when external security disappears. Latin American Christians confronting political violence and economic injustice find that Paul's model of suffering for others provides theological framework for liberation, theology that seeks to transform society through gospel principles. Each movement demonstrates how Paul's words transcend their historical context, to provide universal principles that work across cultures, centuries, and circumstances. The letter that began as pastoral correspondence becomes revolutionary manifesto, therapeutic resource, and spiritual survival guide. The transformation continues in contemporary contexts, where Paul's words challenge modern forms of oppression and injustice. Human trafficking victims find hope in Paul's declaration that Christ breaks every chain. Refugees discover strength in his promise that divine power works through human weakness. The economically disadvantaged gain dignity from his teaching that worldly status means nothing in God's eyes. Environmental activists draw inspiration from Paul's vision of all creation groaning for redemption. Peace advocates find foundation in his call for unity despite diversity. Social justice workers discover motivation In his example of sacrificing personal comfort for others' welfare, the multiplication effect appears limitless. Each person transformed by Paul's words becomes a catalyst for transforming others. Each community that embraces his principles demonstrates alternative ways of organizing human relationships. Each society that incorporates his values moves closer to the kingdom of love that he describes. Modern research confirms what believers have experienced for centuries. Paul's words produce measurable psychological and social benefits that extend far beyond religious circles. Communities that embrace principles of joy despite circumstances, service rather than dominance, and love over hatred consistently demonstrate higher levels of cooperation, lower rates of violence, and greater resilience during crises. The words that began in a Roman prison continue toppling kingdoms not through military conquest, but through transformed hearts that refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Each individual who discovers joy independent of circumstances becomes a revolutionary force that undermines systems based on fear, greed, and oppression. Paul's letter to the Philippians proves that ideas possess power greater than armies, that love conquers more territory than conquest, and that words committed to faithful hearts become irresistible forces for human transformation. Today, as in every generation since Paul first pressed reed pen to papyrus, these ancient words continue their revolutionary work, toppling kingdoms of hatred with love, replacing thrones of oppression with service, and establishing realms of joy where despair once reigned supreme. This is the continuing revolution. Words written in chains that break every chain, imprisoned thoughts that liberate every prison, and love letters that become manifestos for transforming the world. In the deepest ocean trenches, where sunlight never penetrates and pressure would crush surface dwellers instantly, life thrives in forms that defy imagination. These creatures have adapted to environments so extreme that they seem to belong to alien worlds, yet they demonstrate life's remarkable ability to flourish wherever conditions allow even the slightest possibility of existence. Today, we witness an equally remarkable adaptation, how words written on papyrus in a first-century Roman prison have found new life in digital environments that Paul could never have imagined, yet continue to transform hearts with the same power they possessed when ink first dried in flickering lamplight. The transformation begins with something that seems almost miraculous: satellite imaging that reveals the complete layout of ancient Philippi buried beneath Turkish farmland. From space stations orbiting 250 miles above Earth, sophisticated sensors penetrate soil and vegetation to map structures that have been hidden for 15 centuries. The images reveal streets where Paul once walked, buildings where Lydia conducted her purple dye business, and the forum where Roman officials first heard the revolutionary message that would outlast their empire. Ground-penetrating radar, deployed by teams of archaeologists working with precision that would impress Roman engineers, maps Paul's likely prison location with meter-precise accuracy. The technology uses electromagnetic pulses that travel through Earth and return with information about buried structures, creating three-dimensional maps of underground features without disturbing a single stone. The radar reveals chambers beneath what was once the Roman forum rooms with dimensions that match historical descriptions of first-century prison cells. Iron fragments consistent with ancient chain fittings appear in soil samples. Stone walls show chisel marks characteristic of Roman construction techniques. Layer by layer, scientific analysis reconstructs the physical environment where Paul created his masterpiece of pastoral communication. But the digital revolution's most remarkable achievement appears in the preservation and analysis of manuscripts themselves. Digital. Manuscript projects photograph 1,500 ancient copies of Paul's letters using resolution technology that captures individual ink molecules. Each manuscript page requires multiple exposures under different lighting conditions. Ultraviolet light reveals ink that appears invisible to normal vision. Infrared photography penetrates layers of text, where scribes wrote over earlier documents, and multispectral imaging separates different writing layers to recover text thought permanently lost. The resulting digital archives preserve manuscript details with greater accuracy than the human eye can perceive. Researchers can examine papyrus fiber patterns, ink chemical composition, and writing implement characteristics that provide detailed information about where, when, and how each copy was created. Computer analysis identifies scribal habits across centuries with detective-like precision. One Egyptian monk, working in a monastery near Alexandria, consistently misspells the Greek word for rejoice in exactly the same distinctive way across 40 years of copying Paul's letters. His unique error pattern appears in dozens of manuscripts, allowing scholars to trace his influence throughout North African Christianity. Another scribe, working in a Syrian monastery during the 6th century, develops a distinctive method for forming the letter gamma that appears nowhere else in ancient literature. Digital analysis reveals his hand in manuscripts discovered in locations separated by thousands of miles, suggesting either extensive travel or sophisticated networks for sharing texts across the early Christian world. The technology reveals fascinating details about ancient book production that illuminate how Paul's words spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. Some manuscripts show evidence of being copied from dictation. Multiple scribes working simultaneously as a reader spoke the text aloud. Others display characteristics of individual copying, where single scribes worked alone with exemplar texts propped before them. Chemical analysis of ink reveals international cooperation in manuscript production. Iron sulfate compounds show mineral signatures that match geological formations in specific regions, allowing researchers to trace ink sources across continents. Some manuscripts contain ink made from materials found only in Egypt, Spain, and Britain, evidence of trade networks that supplied Christian scriptoriums with materials from across the known world. Artificial intelligence translation programs process Paul's letter to the Philippians into 2,685 languages and dialects, including many that possess no written tradition and exist only in oral form among isolated tribal communities. The AI systems can analyze linguistic patterns in Paul's Greek text and generate translations that preserve not just literal meaning, but rhetorical structure, emotional tone, and theological nuance. Computer algorithms identify parallel constructions, chiastic patterns, and rhythmic elements that characterize Paul's writing style, then reproduce these features in target languages, using their own grammatical and poetic conventions. Some of these translations represent the first time Paul's words have been available in languages spoken by fewer than 1,000 people. Tribal groups in Amazon rainforests, mountain communities in Papua New Guinea, and nomadic peoples in Central Asia now have access to Paul's message of joy, independent of circumstances in their own linguistic frameworks. The digital distribution systems operate with speed that would astonish ancient scribes who spent months creating single copies. A translation completed in one location can be transmitted instantaneously to any point on Earth with internet connectivity. Digital files require no physical transportation, no customs inspections, no risk of destruction during transit. Yet the most remarkable aspect of this digital transformation appears in how modern believers continue the dangerous tradition of preserving and sharing Paul's words despite oppression. In underground churches across restricted nations, believers receive Paul's letters through encrypted smartphone applications that disguise biblical content as ordinary commercial software. The apps use sophisticated coding techniques that hide sacred texts within apparently innocent databases, restaurant menus that contain Bible verses, shopping lists that conceal prayers, photo albums that preserve scripture passages in digital watermarks, invisible to surveillance technology. The encryption methods employ mathematical principles that would require centuries of computer processing to break without proper keys. Believers memorize numerical sequences that unlock hidden content, creating security systems that protect divine truth from governmental suppression while maintaining access for faithful hearts. Some applications operate through steganography, the practice of hiding information within other digital media. Paul's letter to the Philippians appears embedded in music files, concealed within image pixels, or distributed as metadata attached to seemingly unrelated documents. The technology allows believers to possess and share biblical content without creating any visible evidence of religious activity. Social media platforms become vehicles for sharing Paul's words through coded messages that use contemporary language to communicate ancient truths. Believers develop sophisticated systems of hashtags, emojis, and cultural references that allow them to quote scripture and share theological insights while appearing to engage in ordinary online conversation. The same devotion that inspired medieval monks to carry manuscripts across frozen seas now motivates modern believers to develop technological solutions for sharing sacred texts with fellow Christians facing persecution. Underground networks use blockchain technology to create decentralized distribution systems that cannot be controlled or eliminated by any single authority. The digital preservation creates permanent archives that exceed the durability of any physical medium. Multiple copies of Paul's letters exist on servers located on every continent, backed up through cloud systems that automatically replicate data across geographic regions. Natural disasters, political upheavals, or technological failures that might destroy physical libraries cannot eliminate these digital collections. Modern scholars use artificial intelligence to analyze manuscript traditions with unprecedented sophistication. Machine learning algorithms identify textual relationships between manuscripts by comparing hundreds of thousands of variant readings, creating family trees that map how different versions of Paul's letters descended from original sources through copying processes spanning centuries. The analysis reveals fascinating insights about how Paul's message adapted to different cultural contexts while maintaining theological integrity. Manuscripts from different regions show subtle variations that reflect local concerns. Ethiopian copies emphasize passages about unity across ethnic divisions, while manuscripts from areas facing persecution highlight themes of joy despite suffering. Quantum computing promises even greater analytical capabilities. Quantum algorithms could process manuscript data at speeds that make current supercomputers seem primitive, potentially revealing patterns and relationships that remain hidden with current technology. Virtual reality systems allow modern believers to experience reconstructed environments where Paul lived and wrote. Users can walk through digital recreations of first-century Philippi, sit in reproduced Roman prison cells, and handle virtual manuscripts that display exact details of ancient documents. The technology provides educational experiences that make Paul's historical context vivid and immediate. Augmented reality applications overlay ancient features onto modern landscapes, showing visitors to archaeological sites how locations appeared during Paul's lifetime. Tourists in modern Turkey can use smartphone apps that reveal the layout of ancient Philippi superimposed on current topography, complete with buildings, streets, and geographical features that existed when Paul first arrived from Troas. The global connectivity that digital technology enables creates opportunities for international collaboration that medieval scholars could never imagine. Researchers in different countries share discoveries instantaneously, collaborate on translation projects across time zones, and combine expertise in ways that accelerate understanding of Paul's letters. Crowdsourcing projects engage thousands of volunteers in manuscript transcription, translation verification, and textual analysis. Citizens without formal training contribute to scholarly research by digitizing documents, checking translations, and identifying patterns that professional academics might miss. The democratization of access transforms how Paul's words reach contemporary audiences. Cost barriers that once limited Bible ownership disappear when digital versions become freely available through internet connectivity. Geographic barriers dissolve when believers in remote locations can access the same biblical resources available in major universities. Language barriers diminish as translation technology improves and multiplies available versions. Audio recordings make Paul's letters accessible to illiterate populations, while digital formatting assists readers with visual impairments or learning disabilities. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this digital transformation is how ancient words retain their power to transform modern hearts despite technological mediation. Believers reading Paul's letters on smartphone screens experience the same joy, hope, and spiritual strength that sustained Christians reading handwritten copies by candlelight. The medium changes dramatically, but the message produces identical results: lives redirected by divine love, communities formed through shared faith, and individuals discovering purposes greater than personal ambition. Digital technology amplifies rather than diminishes Paul's impact. Social media enables believers to share verses that inspire them with global audiences instantly. Online communities form around shared study of Paul's letters, creating fellowship that transcends geographic boundaries. Digital commentaries and study tools make sophisticated biblical scholarship accessible to ordinary believers worldwide. The same words that once traveled dangerous roads in the saddlebags of faithful messengers now travel fiber optic cables at the speed of light, reaching destinations Paul could never have imagined, with messages he could never have anticipated, would prove so universally relevant. Underground churches in China share Paul's promises of strength through weakness. Refugees in Africa find hope in his declarations about citizenship in heaven. Young people in Western cities discover meaning in his teachings about purpose beyond material success. Each digital transmission carries forward the 20th century tradition of faithful preservation that began when scribes copied Paul's words by lamplight while Rome burned above them. The technology changes, but the devotion remains constant, human hearts committed to ensuring that divine truth remains accessible to every generation. Today, Paul's letter to the Philippians exists in more formats, languages, and accessible forms than any document in human history. It speaks through devices that fit in human pockets, reaches locations more remote than any Roman road ever reached, and touches hearts in circumstances Paul could never have imagined. Yet the message remains unchanged. Joy, independent of circumstances, strength, through divine power, love that transforms human relationships, and hope that transcends every limitation. Ancient words in digital worlds proving that some truths are so fundamental to human experience that no technological advancement can improve upon their essential message. Only multiply their reach and accelerate their impact on hearts hungry for authentic transformation. The revolution that began in a Roman prison continues in digital realms, carried forward by the same spiritual power that turned imprisonment into opportunity, weakness into strength, and ancient letters into timeless treasures that speak as clearly today as they did when Paul first pressed reed pen to papyrus in the flickering light of an oil lamp.